Welcome to the Ultimate Coach Podcast, Conversations from Being, inspired by the book, The Ultimate Coach, written by Amy Hardison and Alan Thompson. Join us each week with the intention of expanding your state of being, and your experience will be remarkable. Remember, this is a podcast about being. It is a podcast about you. To explore more deeply, visit theultimatecoachbook.com. Now, enjoy today's conversation from Being.
Welcome to another episode of the Ultimate Coach Podcast. I'm Meredith Bell, one of your hosts for the show. You are going to love our guest today. I know I do. Her name is Gina Carlson. Gina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Meredith. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so excited because when I read the Book of Being, known as The Ultimate Coach, I was drawn in by your stories, and I've reread them multiple times. They're some of my favorites in the book, and I'm so looking forward to exploring some of those as part of our conversation today. And I am guessing my listeners will too as we get into that, but I'll identify which chapter so they can go check it out after our conversation. I think a good place to start is for you to describe, how did you first learn about Steve Hardison? I know you coached with him, 9 years ago? And so tell us a little bit about your journey to finding him.
Yeah. So, nothing for me is coincidence in my life. Just completed about 4 years at the University of Santa Monica. I was a student and then a volunteer, and it was the end of 2013, and my son was in he had just come home from his first semester in college. So I was living in my very first phase of that empty nest kind of trauma. Like you come home, you drop him at college, and then you come home and it's like, what? There's no hand clapping there. There's nobody there ushering you on to your next fuller identity of life. And I ended up New Year's Eve, 2013, joining a friend at a Byron Katie New Year's Eve weekend. And Steve Hardison was there. And my friend nudged me and said, "That's Steve Hardison." And I knew of him because he's a University of Santa Monica graduate. I'll never forget my first view of him. I just saw this magnificent presence, and in his stature, he's tall, and his, in the world of men, you can't miss Steve in a room. And then his energy and his smile and the way he dressed, and he was there with Lil, his daughter. My heart started to pound, and I didn't like the feeling because historically that for me means this is a meeting. This is something for me. And I didn't know what it was. And I was a little tapped out on, I'd been 15 years with coaching or getting my master's or different kinds of transformational practices. And yet I also was feeling a little bit uncertain about what was next for me. I had a thriving career at the time, but I felt like I had a larger contribution to make. And so much of the why of everything that I did in corporate was to be a good provider for my son. And it was not a natural habitat for me. And really, when I think about what was my goal for a lot of that journey in corporate, it was just to not get fired, was just to hit my numbers in sales. And, I ended up, having a spectacular, amazing, meaningful career there. But I knew there was more, and there's Steve Hardison, and an introduction was made, and he invited me to have dinner with him on New Year's Eve at the Byron Katie event. And I was his presence and his sincerity and his his invitation, it was so powerful. I said yes and made calls, changed plans. And so that was my first experience with Steve Hardison. And our dinner was very ordinary. It was very having dinner with a friend. We just got to know each other. And he asked me what I was up to and what I was going for in my life. And that just kind of launched, 2 months later, I was writing that first check, and lots happened in those first 8 weeks before I started coaching with him February 1st, 2014, right around there, give or take a day. And what I went through in those 8 weeks between New Year's Eve and I don't do math very well. 5 weeks, New Year's Eve till the beginning of February. What I went through was such a shift and such an upgrade, just even thinking that big of a possibility of hiring a coach who commanded that rate and the level of commitment that it was. Because as you know, you don't do Zoom with Steve Hardison. You fly to Arizona and you're on time and you be ready and present for the experience. So.
Well, it's so interesting, Gina, that you talked about the writing the big check, because that was one of the stories in the book that I read. And I thought, oh, this is so fascinating, because I think it was chapter, The Cost of Coaching was the name of the chapter. And in that, you have a little vignette about asking Steve for the single mom discount.
Yeah. It made sense, right?
Yeah. And so tell us about his response and what you did then to come up with the fee to pay him as a single mom.
Yeah. So to be really honest with you, his response really surprised me. It basically was no. And it was firm and loving, but it was, here's why. I'd never do that to you. I'd never disempower you. I would never not be for you and the possibility that if you want this, you can have it. And if you're committed to it, resources are going to show up. And he kind of sent me on my merry way in this beautiful confidence and love and encouragement. And he was excited to work with. Like it was, I really was feeling his valuing the opportunity to coach me. I was feeling that. It was sincere. There was a resonance there. And so, go to the airport, get on the plane. And I got out one of those little Southwest napkins and a pen. And I'm like, okay, what are the ways I could do this? And all the obvious ones, I could sell my house. I could borrow the money. There was all these ways that I could put it on credit cards. I have really good credit. Like there were all these, I could bust into the retirement. There were all these ways that were sort of the first wave of ideas. And none of them, they weren't right. They didn't feel abundant. They didn't feel like they were coming from me being in the unknown, asking the question. They just kind of felt like my strategic mind, figuring it out, angling for a way, and nothing wrong with that. It's been a way. I've done it that way in life. And usually though it's stressful, and in hindsight, I've been able to see there's better ways, but I just sat with it. And what I had to come to in myself, what I came to in myself was really the thing to deal with was a sense of unworthiness that deep down blocking my creativity of what are the possibilities here for this? Where could the resources come from? They were on the other side of this really deep unconscious sense of unworthiness. And so I sat with that. And I had just been hired by a company. I'd been recruited to come to this company in my industry that was recently taken over by a CEO that I had previously worked with earlier in my career. And I'm working for this company. It's a struggling company. I met with the CEO and I said, here's what's going on. You know, you brought me over here. You believe in me, but I need help. And I would like Steve Hardison on my team to help me do this. And so he was very supportive in giving me whatever the resources I needed to be successful for him at this company. And so we just structured, it just really was a restructuring of my comp package in such a way that Steve's fee was covered, basically. And, you know, I never would have asked. It never would have occurred to me to ask. I wouldn't have never seen that creative possibility if I hadn't first gotten to that reality of that thing, that who am I to ask this new boss? He was an old boss and I knew him and he had confidence in, but who am I? He's got so much going on. He's got this new company. It's a struggling company. And who am I to come in with to me, it just seemed like an extraordinary request. He was so in, and he was so supportive and excited. And it was, I think I talk about it in the book. It was like, I really didn't need the coaching after that, because to have come up with the fee, the opportunity he gave me to go bigger, to go deeper in myself, and the resources would be there. It was just one of the most extraordinary events of my life to have it unfold that way.
Thank you for bringing that to life and filling in those details, because I think there's so many layers to what you just talked about that I think that in itself is enough for people to stop and reflect on what gets in our way of asking, and the willingness to go deeper to find out what's really behind our hesitation to ask. Because you had these ideas related to this boss. Initially, that was to me, you know, kind of the surface part, but there were these deeper issues around your own feeling of who am I to do this? And I'm just curious, do you remember, Gina, what process you went through in terms of sitting with it, listening, to overcome that hesitation and decide, I'm going to ask for this?
Yeah, it would, you know, largely it was working with reframing it and just honest questions like just around commitment, that me thinking small, me making this about my worth is really me failing this company and the CEO. And the challenge of taking on this role at this company, it was big. And to not do everything that I could to bring everything that I could to the table it just became just real sandpaper on my values. And so I think that's one of the heartbreaks of humanity, is we're really stuck in these filters and these lenses through which we're seeing life and believing what we see. And to just, remove the filter and put another one in there, like, oh my God, they're counting on you. Mm-hmm. Really? That's not a big enough reason to, and it wasn't easy to go up to the CEO and say, hey, can we talk? That was not an easy conversation. But once it was coming from a place of service and about what the objective was, about being able to overcome the challenges and what it would take, it just moved into a whole other place of love. And it was a very loving experience. And with the CEO, I wasn't talking him into anything. I wasn't selling him on anything. I was just putting forth, I was showing him something, a possibility. And yeah.
That is just, it's such a wonderful lesson, I think, for all of us to think about reframing, as you said, when we want to ask for something, looking at it as how would it be a disservice to myself or this other person if I don't ask?
Yeah.
What are we going to miss out on if I don't take this step? As opposed to, oh, I'm bothering them, or fear of rejection. I mean, there's just so many things that, like you say, we put these filters in and expect things, but to come from that spirit of love and service, I'm sure he felt that. People can sense where the place we're coming from when we are interacting with them. And so your whole demeanor, your way of being with him had an impact on his receptivity, I would think.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And when you think about your coaching time with Steve, what would you say were some of the other elements of, say, limitations or beliefs that you held that he helped you to unwrap and maybe drop off?
I love this question. I'm probably a little bit of a wacky profile of client that is atypical to Steve, because a big part of my call to work with him is, in a patriarchal culture that we live in, I have been very bought into some of the classic stereotypes in corporate that have to do with gender, how I would poise myself in a conversation with a male colleague or boss versus a female. And I could feel that, like, the limitations, but they were concretized in me, and there was a way that the deep root of it was limiting me in my professional life. And so when I first met Steve, like so many times when I meet male authority, I have a fight or flight freeze response. I freeze and I really contract and I get into this defended state. I dig down and, the underlying thought, I was even having a new wave of discovery on this. There's like this underlying thought, something bad is going to happen. Something bad is going to happen. And so I thought, what better opportunity for me to get free of this than to work with a coach who not only is a master at teacher of empowerment and freedom and love and service, but also is going to be in one of these male authoritarian bodies. I know this is weird, right? This is probably not what you're used to hearing, but it was so helpful because he was such a safe place for me to just confront all of my, like, one of the first things that happened is he made me go to Landmark because I came in probably my second or third session talking about how often male colleagues or authority make me feel something, make me feel like a cocktail waitress with no brain, or a person to run and get the coffee, and oh my God, did he get me on that one. And he said, there won't be one more session until you go do the Landmark course, which was really brilliant and it gave me just the right context for how the conversation with Steve would go over the next 4 years, that nothing happens outside of my own thinking. And so that was just a huge piece of work that helped me get free. And so tell me, your original question here was, what were some of the other things that I
uncovered in terms of limitations you had? I mean, you just touched on a big one in terms of your perspective. I guess, what other lenses or filters did he help you break away from?
I think that in my personal development journey, which has been my number one priority since I was a kid. The idea that nothing happens outside of my own thinking, and the 1,000 ways that I got to see the truth of that through his coaching and support, and just how it's still in me now, because I catch myself in thinkings or assumptions about life or the world or myself. And he's now embodied in me. Gina, there's nothing happening outside your own thinking. Go get it. What is it? Free yourself. So, there's so many. I mean, he's an enlightened man, and his mastery of being and as it's, he's an example of it in his life is, obvious. There's just such a transmission and a download that I received in being in the room with him, being one of his clients, an upgrade, incomparable. But that would be, if I had to characterize it, I would say, like, what will be with me for all of eternity? His blessing from me. There is nothing happening outside of your own thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so powerful. Well, thinking about your own thinking, the other favorite story of yours from the Book of Being was in chapter 27 on creation. And it's where he created you as the chief culture officer. And I would love for you to share that story in your own words. What was the evolution there, the spark that caused him to say that, and then how it actually came to be?
Yes, it was a great day. It was well, I'll never forget this day. It was my field trip day at Infusionsoft, who, as you know, Clayton Mask is one of, or has been, or is, I don't know if he still is, but a Steve Hardison client. And my passion was around culture. It was how I ended my corporate career, CEOs asking me to help shift culture. And so he very generously brought me to Infusionsoft for a field trip to look at a possibility of a culture, a corporate culture. And it just blew my socks off being there and just watching just the way that employees were, how they were engaged, the way that they supported the whole creative process, but also an environment of great integrity and productivity. It was just this beautiful, like the best I'd ever seen of form and formless working together in a dance. Like typically, in corporate, it could either be too rigid or too loose, but there was such an amazing creation happening there. And so he brought me there for the field trip, and we were sitting in I had to get in his Porsche to get to Infusionsoft, which I don't do speed. I'm pretty much the snail speed person. I prefer it. Slower the better. So that happens, and, maybe he might drive, fast, and we go in and we do the field trip, and some funny things happen there, but that's too long of a story. There were some learnings for me where I'll share a quick one that was very funny. We came out and we got in the car, and he was ruffled. Like there was ruffling in his demeanor, and so he was very visceral. And he said, "You didn't follow the play." And I was like the law, like no idea what he was talking about. I said, "What?" He said, "I called the play and you didn't follow the play." Well, I got so overwhelmed with my enthusiasm for Infusionsoft that I sort of broke out a little bit and was taking liberties and having conversation. I think I was even in Clayton's office, where I was invited to come and sort of witness a thing. And I just was beside myself with it. I was like a little kid, and I was very enthusiastic and very, not being mindful of the space and the objective. Totally misplay, which, so anyway, it was a learning moment of not, the blind spots of not being aware and getting to, okay, yeah. So how to manage enthusiasm with some containment. And anyway, so yeah, but it was after that. And then, it's always, "I love you, I love you." I said, "Okay, thank you." And so we're sitting there in the Porsche and just, engaged in a conversation about what my experience was. And he said, we were really, the whole thing is, what is my next version of me? What is my next career? What's my next way that I'm going to be contributing? And we're in the conversation. He says, well, you're a visionary. I said, well, yeah. Yeah. He said, CEOs are visionaries. I said, oh, yeah, no. I was like, big no, I don't want to be a CEO. I don't know why, but at the time, it was just no. But what occurred for me when he said that, I said, but I'd sure love to coach them. I'd sure love to help them shift culture and forward their dream and their vision. And that's when he said, oh, so Chief Culture Officer is kind of how that happened. And then I was, oh, Steve, come on. What planet are you from? There is no such thing. I've been in corporate 20 years. I know HR. I know what, is going on there. And I was like this, and he was steady Eddie. He was just hanging in there with me in all this, ranting. He said, just start speaking it into the world and having conversation wherever you are, on airplanes. In fact, today, when you fly back to LA, have a conversation with the person next to you. Just start having yourself occur as the Chief Culture Officer. It's who you are. So it's like he's saying, get who you are. Stop needing the world to get who you are. You get who you are and watch what happens. And, that was June of 2014. Yeah. And September of 2014, and the stories in the book of being, the CEO of a company asked to meet with me. And I wasn't looking for a job, but if a CEO says, I'd like to meet with you, I would, I use those as opportunities to just have a conversation with visionary, but I wasn't looking for a new position or anything. So I was kind of more maybe candid and loose in the conversation, and kind of wasn't trying to put a best self forward. I was just sharing my experience and my life and my journey professionally. And he just kept leaning in, the CEO, Ken Campbell. And he said the words, I want you to come work for me, and I want you to be my Chief Culture Officer. And I, at this point, I'm like trying to be cool, because inside I was freaking out. And so I hung out for a second, I said, excuse me. And I got up and I went in the bathroom. And we were at the Newport Beach Ritz-Carlton, in the swank, cocktail lounge restaurant. And I'm in the stall in the bathroom, and it's 9:00 at night, but I had to call Steve. I called him, Steve Hardison. You're never going to believe what happened. And anyway, I think I got his voicemail, left a message, or maybe I got him in person. I don't remember, but it was pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm. And my guess is he was not surprised at all.
No.
Yeah. It's such a powerful story. And I've read it, like I said, multiple times, because of the power of speaking into the world who it is we really are. I love that you framed it that way. This whole idea of we're not being disingenuous or trying to pull something off, where we actually see ourselves that way as we speak it. And it goes back to holding back. Don't you think, Gina, circling back to the unworthiness? Who am I to say something like this? Do you think that's in there too?
Oh, I would call it a crisis of the human species, but certainly territory I know well. And at this point of life, when I'm in that uncertainty, that unknown, creating from nothing, I'm kind of in one of those phases again in my life. And there is that, it's just sort of reflex. It's primal. it's the first thing that locks me down is danger, danger, red alert, red alert. Let's use the unworthiness tactic to stop her because she's about to go off again and create something from nothing. And it's really freaky and scary. And I don't know in a way like who I am in terms of this dynamic, because creation for me is, well, I think probably for a lot of people, but it's torture in the beginning. It's so uncomfortable. And I think a lot of I left corporate in 2015, and a lot of what I've learned in the last 8 years now, how I've been creating this new iteration, and what I love is meditation and all the ways that just different ways of meditating and how that can help free us so that we can live the life of our dream. But a lot of my efforts in the last 8 years have been recreating from that old identity, from the vice president of sales, from the chief culture officer. Like, those were hard-won identities that replaced, former identities of, oh, I'm just a cocktail waitress, high school dropout, but I got very attached to them. And, what's exciting about life now is to be able to look at what it's cost me to not be willing to let those go. Just let them fade. They're dead bodies. That was then, this is now. As if, the be all end all of my life was to be, an executive in a corporation, which I love and I'm proud of. And I worked from my whole heart in being my best. And that was the result. I was never aiming for it. That would have given me a heart attack, just my wiring. But I was so awed by how the outcome unfolded just by operating from my heart and doing the best I can and showing up and being willing to think big and muddle through. And so, but then, it was hard to let go of it and start over, clean slate. I'll be honest.
Well, and I appreciate that, because I think sometimes we can think, oh, I should have figured this out by now, or why am I experiencing this again? I've learned to be more gentle with myself in terms of listening, but not criticizing myself for things like that the thoughts that come in. And I love what you just said about letting go or letting them fall away, these earlier identities that were important for various reasons, and being willing to step into that unknown, recognizing it's going to be uncomfortable at first. And that's okay, because it sounds like you recognize that's part of the process of making that shift or moving into a new identity. And I remember in our earlier conversation, Gina, you talked about something Steve taught you around relationship creation. And I would love for you to share, because I think that would be very meaningful and relevant to our listeners.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I don't know why I didn't put this one forward as, it was 2020 and I was living in a travel lodge in Ojai that summer on 7 liters of oxygen, having just literally escaped the mainstream medical model, the ICU, with the help of some just genius doctors. And Alan Thompson and Amy Hardison invited me to share my story with Steve. It was when that was happening. And I wasn't feeling up to it in a way, I was just trying to stay alive at this point. That's another story. It turns out it was a stress response, but nobody could figure it out. And, because it was affecting the lungs, it was pretty serious. But in the end, again, it wasn't serious. It was de-stressing more than anything else. So And yeah. So anyway, there I was. And, the story didn't end up going into the book, but I would say that of all the things, this one will make me weep, Meredith. Of all the things that I created with Steve Hardison, my relationship with Bob is the one that is my greatest treasure. He's my life partner, my soulmate, the love of my life. And so let's see here, it's 2014, 15, and I had been separated 5 years, had a very beautiful completion to my marriage, and was very intentional about partnership going forward and being really clear and intentional in what I wanted in a partner. And so I brought it to Steve. I said, I really want to create my partner. And so he really supported me in, well, who is he to you? Who are you to him? And so I did these elaborate, yummy writings about how I feel with you, DP, I call him DP, how I feel when I'm with you, who you are to me, but also who I am to you. And to feel into who I was to him was never an experience I ever had in relationship, and hence probably why they didn't go well, how I was showing up in relationships. So the universe has a sense of humor. I spent a couple years in this process, and oh my God, it's like New Year's Eve again. 2016, this man, our neighbor introduced us. He calls and he asked me to go to dinner. And it was actually the night before New Year's Eve, December 30th. And I was a little bit, he had called me a few weeks before and said, oh, would you like to have lunch? You're new to the neighborhood. And then crickets. I never heard from him. He calls New Year's Eve and invites me to dinner. And the funny part about this is his name is Robert Hayes, and he's an actor. And he's known for some of the most heartfelt movies of our time, Airplane, Homeward Bound, Starman series in the 80s. And I was a little reticent about that part of it, having lived in LA for 30 years. But the metaphor of star, of stardust, of miracle, of otherworldly, of universe, this man is the embodiment of, he is the most beautiful man, like who he is as a man. And that he's a comedic actor too was hilarious, because my father was a comedy writer, and the joke in the family is I don't get jokes, being so literal. So, but it's been 6.5 years of just beautiful creating our relationship. And it is funny, we faced fires. He lost his home in the fires in 2018, like epic flooding. 1 year it was floods, 1 year it was fires. It was, life-threatening illness, pandemics, there's like, whoa, we're in this together, dealing with some really extraordinary events that the whole world was dealing with. But it was such a test in our relationship of, are we doing this together? Are we doing this, to have a partner who loses his home in 20 years, and it's a deal. There's some trauma there, and there's some way that, when you're in union with a person, my pain is your pain. We're in this, our energies are commingling every day, and we have just, continued to emerge in deeper love and commitment. And it's probably the proudest thing in my whole life is the quality of loving in this relationship with this man. And he wouldn't be here without Steve Hardison, because Steve made me do some really embarrassing, hard things in the beginning. I'll tell you one, probably the main one. But he said, this is a couple months in, he said, I want you to tell him who he is to you. Now, we've had 4 dates. And I'm thinking, this isn't how it goes. You don't 4 dates in, have a conversation with a man, letting him know he's your soulmate. Like, no, like what you want to scare the guy out. Like, no, I'm not doing that. and yet that deeper knowing in me is this is a trust walk, and like get outside of your cultural conditioning. And one of the things Steve said is, if he runs, good, it's not him. Like he set it up in such a way that I'm going to win either way. Mm-hmm. But it was still really scary. And at the time, Bob had a really bad flu, and we had gone for a drive, and we had pulled over on the side of the road to look at a view. And I reached in my purse, and I had this little folded up piece of paper. I'm like, I have to tell you something. I'm like, me. And I'm so nervous and feeling just so awkward, but it was my heart, and it was real, and it meant everything to me. And I just told him who he was to me and who I hope I was to him. He said nothing, and I thought that was it. And 6.5 years later, he's that one guy in my life who doesn't talk a big game. He just shows up as a big game. Mm-hmm. He just kept showing up, and he just keeps showing up. Yeah.
What a beautiful story.
We for each other, we show up for each other. Thank you. And thank you, Steve Hardison, for your brilliant in doing things so wackadoodly differently.
Well, it fits because you said you're wacky-noodly.
It does, I would say.
But,
yeah.
It's this whole idea of his ability to see in us what we can't see in ourselves, and to have that knowing and to speak with confidence. And, the truth is, one of the key takeaways for me from the book is there's nothing that he does that we can't also do. We also have that same ability to be that perhaps for someone else in our lives. I love your story and the push and your acknowledgement of the resistance that you felt, and yet still followed through, because in your heart, you knew it was the right thing to do. I think that's the key thing when we're interacting with someone, where we have the confidence that they care deeply about us and they have our best interest at heart, and they can see the future us that we can't see in that moment. And that's what he was able to see. That's such a beautiful story. Gina, we could continue talking. We need to wrap up just because of time. And I would love for you to share a little bit about what you're doing today, how people can connect with you and learn more about the work that you're doing in this world.
Yeah, thank you. I want to take 10 seconds to say, just adding on to what you spoke, is as all of us who care about our personal development are choosing coaches or mentors, the thing that made it possible for me to follow Steve's lead is he never asked me to do anything he hadn't already done, and that there wasn't evidence in his life that wonderful things are going to happen. So I just wanted to say that, because I do believe in verifying, not blindly following, but really verifying, who we're choosing to lead Precious Us, to guide Precious Us. So, so my work is ever evolving, Emboditate. It's a movement, breath, and mindset focused meditation practice. It's really for anyone who's identified with being highly sensitive or had traumas. There's ways that we do get locked down subconsciously, and it needs a little more than focusing on thoughts. It needs sometimes to be worked out with some movement, with some breath, with just creatively in the body, because that part of us, is 95% unconscious. It's irrational. It doesn't respond to reason. So those of us who are highly sensitive, or who've had, more trauma than is healthy, say there's healthy trauma, that the pressure and stress that makes us grow, but then there's ways that people just get stuck and locked down. This is my work. This is my passion. And just combining that with neurolinguistics, with working with the mind, working with breath, and really just letting people discover for themselves this territory that they are of inner resources that, so much of the information just does come in sensorially, not cognitively, and to be able to identify that as information. And then it's so amazing how our biological intelligence, once we give it license to, okay, what is that? And listen to our bodies, that information, it's so intelligent, genius. So this is my work. There's a new launch that is me. It's called The Biology of Being, which really does speak to, and it's funny because the acronym is BOB. So yeah, it really does speak to what my work is, what my contribution is, and how I love to support and serve.
That's great. And that's emboditate, that combines embody and meditation, right? These are two key.
Yeah. It's embodying your knowledge, your thought, the ones you want to have. It's getting it so felt deeply in the felt sense of your being that it is the becoming of you. And it is my journey. And it was part of the compliment that my meditation practice brought to my work with Steve Hardison. It was a total marriage and very effective for me. So
that's wonderful. Gina, thank you. You are such a gift to me, to this community and the world. So thank you for the beautiful way you show up with love and service today, and I'm guessing every day. And it's just been a joy talking with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you for listening. If you know someone who would benefit from today's conversation, please share this podcast with them. Also, we invite you to visit theultimatecoachbook.com so you can continue your personal exploration of being. There you will find links to join our wonderful community, get your own copy of the Ultimate Coach book, and more. Simply go now to www.theultimatecoachbook.com. That's www.theultimatecoachbook.com. The link is also available in the show notes. We appreciate your support. Be blessed. Be you.